Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about astrology, the coronavirus, and isolation. Now, as many of you may know, due to this coronavirus pandemic, there's many places in the world where people are they're basically forced to isolate themselves at least to some degree. There's places that have many provisions or curfews or what have you may be imposed and in place, and there's certain stipulations in certain countries. Say you can only go out for this and maybe be back home at a certain time. Well, a lot of whether one is adaptable or more amenable to this, basically, or whether they're basically very resistant to this, a lot of that can be predicated and dependent on their natal chart, the elements, aspects in it, or what have you, in general placements. And the thing about it is, like, if you like at a chart, the first thing that stands out to me, I mean, you have certain charts that are more gregarious and extroverted. Then you have more charts, there are other astrology charts where people are inclined to be more introspective and introverted. And I mean, if you have in your natal chart, if you have a preponderance of planets at the bottom half of the chart, in other words, in houses 1 through 6, you may be more inclined toward being introverted anyway, and more introspective, more reserved. And especially if you have the planets, majority of your major astrological influences in feminine signs as well. I have both in my chart. Majority of my planets are on the bottom half of the chart. I have 8 of my 10 planets in houses 1 through 6, and the 2 planets that are on the top half of the chart. One is Saturn in the 12th house, which could be reclusive anyway. You're talking about the 12th house, even though it's on 12th. The 12th house, of course, is on the top half of a horoscope, but it's still a very secluded, reserved house. And you look at, and the other planet on the top half of the chart is what I have is Neptune in the 7th house. And when you have Neptune in the 7th house, sometimes that can manifest in the dissolving and dissipation of relationships. And with me, the thing about it shows, and I also have the majority of my major astrological influences in feminine signs. So it's a little bit of a double whammy for me. But on the positive side, it's not like I had to make a major transition or adjustment in terms of confinement. People that have a strong 12th house, dominant 12th house in their chart, can be about isolation anyway. Now, there's other things to look at in the chart as far as whether you're looking at a person that could be more in terms of being more gregarious or extroverted, or more introverted and introspect. I mean, there's actually things that you might see a little bit more subtle that you can look at as well. I mean, let's say, I mean, you could even look at going back to looking at where house rulers can be. Like, for example, let's say you have the ruler of your 12th house in the 3rd house, or vice versa, or the ruler of the 3rd house in the 12th house. That could be a person that might have certain restrictions and limitations in their communications anyway. I have the ruler of my 12th house in my 3rd house in my natal chart. Now, for me, I don't think that manifests in terms of my communication ability, but there's limit. But what it does is, I think for me, the way it works out is that I have limitations in who I communicate with. I don't really communicate with an overabundance or surfeit of people, and I think that plays a role of it. And again, I do have a very introverted chart. Now, there are other things to look at too. I mean, also transits in one's natal chart as well can play a role. I mean, you're talking about, like, if somebody, say, has a transit Neptune hitting their Saturn. let's say that it's happening during this time of the coronavirus. Well, they would obviously have their, if transit Neptune is making a conjunction to one's natal Saturn, well, naturally they would have Saturn in Pisces, and because transit Neptune would be in Pisces at this time. Now, I mean, when you have a transit like that, a person may feel very alone and very desolate at that time. And when you have and when you're talking about it being in Pisces, due to matters with isolation, Pisces and Neptune energy. I mean, Pisces is connected with isolation, and it's also associated, of course, with what I've talked about in previous videos, and I'm sure you've heard from other astrologers as well, that Pisces can also be associated with diseases that can't be eradicated. Now, also, too, what I talked about before in terms of looking at the chart in terms of disparity between introversion, extroversion, and indicators for that, and how one may deal with this the coronavirus situation, which of course is imposed because of this, has imposed a lot of isolation on people. Now, other things too in a progressed chart. Of course, it's important to look at that as well, because even if your natal chart might have a lot of indicators of introversion, the progressed chart might have more indicators of gregariousness, or vice versa. But remember, regardless of whatever your progressed chart indicates at this time and where the placements are in one's progressed chart, it doesn't eradicate or obliterate the energy from the natal chart. The natal chart stays with you as a constant, where the progressed chart can modify things a little bit. I mean, let's say, somebody has, they have Taurus rising in their natal chart, but they have Gemini rising in the progressed chart. Well, the Gemini rising may outwardly, in the progressed chart, may be a little bit more loquacious and being and really more conversational as far as their outward projection is, but it won't eliminate the Taurus rising energy in the natal chart. The Taurus rising native may just be a little bit more loquacious and more talkative, and be somebody that really just wants to get out more and socialize more so at that point in time. But the Taurus rising energy will still stay. So those are some of the things to look at as far as this go. And also going back to transits, if you're having transits hitting your 12th house, it could, and even if your chart suggests you're more of an extroverted, outgoing person, you might be somebody that may be more about isolation and being alone, being desolate, more so than average at that point in time, due to the transits hitting your chart. And the thing about it too is, if you could even have things like Venus in the 12th house, or the ruler of the 12th house in the 7th house, or the ruler of the 7th house in the 12th house. That could be of somebody that may be prone or have a propensity toward relationship restrictions anyway. So it's more than just looking at the chart in terms of planets below the horizon, on the top half of the chart, bottom half of the chart, major astrological influences in masculine or feminine signs. It's a lot more than that, because as I've talked about in previous videos, and many of you may know this from other astrologers, that a chart is very complex and intricate. I mean, there's so many proponents of it, and you can't really isolate one particular thing in the chart. And the thing about it too is, and also when you look at a chart that, say, has a very strong mutable energy, somebody that's got a preponderance of major astrological influences, that are in mutable signs, actually, it's an indicator where they could be more adaptable in general because to certain things, and including the coronavirus situation, because they are mutable and they are shifting energy. They have the stronger ability to go with the flow. But you take somebody that has a very dominant fixed chart that has a lot of major astrological influences in fixed signs. I mean, fixed sign people can be very intractable, very, very rigid, and especially if it's throwing that person that has that strong dominant fixed astrological energy in their chart, if it's making them do a lot of different things that they ordinarily would not want to do, that is that to me, I see that as where they could be very difficult for them, because again, fixed sign energy can be very intractable and intransigent, and they might actually have the most difficulty in making the adjustment and transition to something like that. Because my chart is very interesting in a way in terms of how adaptable I am to this situation. Not, again, going back to my chart being a very introverted and introspective chart, having Saturn in the 12th house, and also having, I didn't say before, I have Ceres in the 12th house. I could be married to seclusion and solitude, and being in Aries, a lot of activity and action in matters pertaining to solitude and seclusion, by myself time. But I also have a very strong fixed energy in my chart. I have a long fixed T-square in my chart, and I have Saturn in Taurus with the Taurus ascendant, Venus in Leo, and Neptune in Scorpio are all in that mixed. So, and I also have, which is not part of my fixed T-square configuration, I also have Aquarius MC, which is very, Aquarius energy. I have an Aquarius on the MC. That could be having that reputation for being very freedom and independent or oriented. And now I'm having my freedom inhibited. So for me, I think what it is, it's basically I'm somewhat adaptable to this, but there's still an annoyance about this situation with me in terms of my adaptability and flexibility to it. So, but anyway, really, there's not a whole lot more I wanted to say about. There's some other aspects in the chart which, you could tell. I talked about Saturn in the 12th house before. Saturn in the 12th house again could be very reclusive anyway, and those people can have difficulty in letting others enter their lives. So it's somebody that may, and also too, I think a lot of the people that what's interesting about this is that this coronavirus and the isolation that is connected with it, actually, it's almost like it's paradoxical. There's actually some benefit to it. You have it may be more detrimental than positive, but what happens is it's about social distancing, but as a result, there's going to be more time for people to do social networking on the internet and get closer to those people that are on the internet, because of course you're not going to pick up any kind of malicious virus just being on your own computer. You're not going to pick that up from anybody else, obviously. So anybody that's the people that are talking about, well, I don't have much time to converse with people on social media. Now, this and that. Now more people will have more time to do that, so they can't say. Most people aren't going to be able to say, "Oh, I was busy, I was doing this," unless they're under some employment where they're still able to work somewhat, or their work involves being on the computer. That might be a little bit, and then you're talking about a different, scenario entirely. But I think Aquarius in general factors in, really, it figures prominently in this. The people that can be very affected by this, it can be Aquarius, Sun, Moon, Ascendant people, because they are the sign associated with social networking. Aquarius can be known to be that universal friend. So they are ones that can be very connected with this basically this situation with this coronavirus, because it's strongly impacting friendships. At this time, of course, for many people, you might be more distant physically from friendships, but it's an opportune time again to connect with the people, the friends that you may have through social media and social networking. It's interesting because at the time we're going to have that super moon in Libra on April 7th, you're going to have Mars in Aquarius conjunct Saturn in Aquarius. And you're going to see I think that you're going to see all this. I mean, Mars in Aquarius can be about a lot of energy into friendships, into into things that are about, I mean, Aquarius could be about goals and aspirations, but it's also very strongly tied in to one's friendships, one's acquaintances. But then you have Saturn making the conjunction to it, which can inhibit that. The government's putting a clamp on a lot of that energy, on energy connected with freedom and independence. So Aquarius energy, I mean, this is a time where Aquarius is really going to feel this. And also because you have that transit, Mars is going to be on, and Saturn is going to be conjunct a lot of people, a lot of people's Aquarius sun, moon, or ascendant at that point, at that time. And it's a mix of this acrimony and this restriction as far as what they're gonna feel at this point in time, because again, Aquarius can feel that energy more strongly in terms of provisions by the government, and it could be a cause for anger and acrimony, and they're really going to feel, I think, their freedom more inhibited, more so than most, because Aquarius is so synonymous with freedom and independence to do my own thing when I want to do it and not being restricted. But they will feel it very strongly during that time. So anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying, stay well.